What's up, guys? Dan here, back again with more story content. This week we pick up where Marissa left off. Remember how she talked about Joshua and the Israelites, how they conquered the land that God promised them by walking around the city walls and then finally shouting and blasting their horns, and the walls came crumbling down. That was pretty crazy, eh? So this week we're talking about Joshua and how he continued to lead the Israelites to victory, continuing to conquer the land that God promised them. So we're going to contrast a bit here. Last week we saw how God led the Israelites to a victory through a kind of passive war against Jericho, meaning that there was really no fighting or battles that were happening. They just kind of walked around and shouted. Well, this week is a little bit different than passive conquering. And if you're saying, well, Daniel, what do you mean by like a non-passive way of conquering? Well, I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, kicking butt and taking names. But that's what's going on here. Joshua and the Israelites are fully kicking butt and taking names. We're looking at pages 94 to 99 in the storybook. Now, there's a lot that goes on in these pages, but essentially, these 6 pages are a recap of Joshua chapters 7 to 12, which talks about Joshua and the Israelites going into battle and conquering many, many communities. If we look in the Bible at Joshua chapter 12, it actually lists off the 31 kings that the Israelites defeated in this time. Now, this looks like a lot, and quite frankly, it is quite a bit. But just so you know, this does not take place in a couple of days or weeks. Rather, this conquering takes place over the course of many years. That being said, looking at the character of Joshua, I can only imagine how epic he must have been. I kind of imagine him as this Obi-Wan Kenobi-esque character. The man just seems like he's seen a lot of battle. He's a great warrior. He's wise and he's humble, and honestly, just a guy you don't want to find yourself up against in battle. And I didn't even mention the fact that he had the power of God on his side. So you could probably sit around the campfire with Joshua at the end of page 99, and the man would just have some crazy stories from his life, from the wandering in the wilderness with Moses to going into battle and out of battle and into battle and out of battle and so on. Needless to say, the man's kind of nuts. So right off the bat, with these battles that Joshua and the Israelites go into fresh off the passive conquering, they actually lose. Okay, so now with battles fought by the sword, Israel is 0 and the enemy is 1. That's not a good start when you've got to defeat 31 kings. So here's what's up. The success in battle of the Israelites depends on their faithfulness to God as a whole unit. So if one person did not follow the clear instructions from God, then the whole unit of Israel suffered. But when they followed God's clear instructions, they found success in battle. So we see on page 94 of the storybook that there's this man named KICKIN. So right after Israel saw Jericho's walls crumble down, they were clearly instructed by God to destroy everything in Jericho. But KICKIN, silly boy, found himself a beautiful robe, some silver coins, and a bar of gold that he thought that he needed. He took them and hid them under his tent. You can find this in Joshua chapter 7. So when the Israelites went into battle against Ai, they went in and it was supposed to be an easy win. But nope. The men that went into battle were chased right back to camp, and many lives were lost along the way. Joshua obviously knew something was up because he knew that God was leading them to victory over Ai. So eventually, KICKIN was found out, and his possessions that he had stolen were destroyed. And they killed KICKIN for his disobedience. Yikes. Okay, so to us, this does seem a little bit extreme, but he was the one person out of thousands of other Israelites who disobeyed God. I mean, get with the program, KICKIN. But at the same time, if I were KICKIN and I was instructed to destroy a city, and then I saw some cash or like an iPhone 12 or a sweet pair of shoes sitting there in the dirt, perfectly good as new, I know I would be a little bit tempted to take that. So to me, I kind of understand KICKIN. But God did give clear instruction, and God had led them this far, so why would he fail the Israelites now? Now, I don't want to just brush over the fact that they literally just killed KICKIN. because that can lead to a lot of confusion about the compassionate nature of God. But we'll get there. So hang on. But first, I want you guys to talk in your small groups for a minute. And while you're talking, think about this. I'm pretty convinced that part of the life that God calls us to is more compassion and more empathy for others every day. Talk for a minute. If you were a kin, what might be hard for you to see destroyed? Okay, guys, thanks for sharing. So let me tell you a little story. I remember when I was in 9th grade, and I went to a small school, so all of us 9th graders did every class together. And we were a good class for the most part, but we had this French teacher. And when it was French class, we were not as good of a class. We would tease her and give her so much grief when she was teaching. But I remember one day she was not having a good day. And we were not heartless, so we did let up on her a little bit, at least most of us. I remember one guy in my class, Braden, was absolutely ruthless and just didn't care if he got detention or anything. And finally, the punishment that the teacher was giving out for his behavior was not just detention for him, but was detention for the whole class. And it didn't stop. That didn't stop Braden. This guy kept tormenting our poor teacher, and all the while, everyone else in the class is getting longer and longer detention time, to the point where they even called everyone's parents. And I got in trouble at home. Come on. Stinking Braden. Now, here's one thing. In that class that day, our French class was a unit. If one of us was out of line, we all felt the effects of that. As unfair as it was, this is what the Israelites felt. And I'm not just talking about with Achin's actions and Israel's defeat against Ai, but with every battle they went into, if someone was not right with God, that affected their battle. So they had to make sure they were all ready and willing to do whatever it took to be a team or a unit or a community who works together for the sake of each other, so that they could all see one another succeed. Braden in French class that day was not thinking about the whole class when he was acting up. Achin was not thinking about the soldiers who would die in battle because of his selfish actions. But there is a reality that we have to grasp with, guys. And this reality exists in the church, it exists in the workplace, in our schools, in our extracurricular activities. And that reality is this: our actions affect those around us. Sometimes our actions may feel like the right thing, but in reality, there's a downstream effect of those decisions that we make. Meaning that we may not think a little decision here will affect me or anyone over here, but oftentimes they do. I believe God wants us to become aware of that. And I believe that is what God wanted the Israelites to become aware of. God said, hey, I've promised you this land. and it's yours. But you do have to claim it. And I'm with you. Just do as I say, as a unit, as one. And when you do this, no kingdom can stand in your way. So moving on from here, we see in the next couple of pages, God leading Joshua and the Israelites back into the battlefields, and Israel, time and time again, conquering the lands that God had promised them. And they did this by remaining faithful to the life that God had called them to, fighting the battles he sent them to, and working together as a nation who followed God's lead. Now, the idea of following God's lead, going where he sends, doing what he tells you, that sounds really great. But I think there's something there that we need to unpack. I think we can talk about what it looks like to follow God's lead, but let's put ourselves in the shoes of one of those thousands of Israelites. To them, I think following God's lead looked like a lot of abiding to the leadership of God, the leadership that God had put in place, aka Joshua, and remaining faithful to Joshua, and remaining faithful to God by remaining faithful to Joshua, trusting that God was leading them. As individuals acting as a unit, knowing that they had to work together to trust God and stay faithful. They had to have faith in each other, that when they went into battle, trusting that their neighbor was doing what God said, because if not, maybe someone would lose their life in the next battle. Every action that they took was for the gain of the person next to them. Isn't that crazy? Great discussion, guys. Now here's the thing. We see lots of pretty intense stuff in these pages in Joshua, but remember that God was using the Israelites to judge other nations in their wickedness. We just don't get that full picture at a first glance. But I want to remind you that God is gracious and caring. Like I said earlier, he wants us to pursue compassion for the people in our communities that we talked about. In Romans 12, 9-13, Paul writes this: "Don't just pretend to love others. Really love them. Hate what is wrong. Hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other. Never be lazy. Work hard to serve the Lord enthusiastically. Rejoice in our confident hope. Be patient in trouble and keep on praying. When God's people are in need, be ready to help them, always eager to practice hospitality." Guys, I think that if a king had have recognized the downstream effects of his actions, he might have second-guessed taking that robe and that gold. He might have been thinking of his community rather than himself. The Israelites won many more battles because of their faithfulness to God and each other, because of their community mindset. They seem to be really great examples of how to live out this passage in Romans. I'm sure the Israelites would have had many more opportunities to not follow the clear instructions God had for them, but they obeyed God, and because of that, their community flourished. So what is that way of life? How do you sum up living selfless lives, showing compassion and love to the people in your community so that we can see them grow? I think that the way we adopt that view of life today is by living for the life of the world. The world being whatever community or group you find yourself in, your family, your team, your class, your small group, for the life of the flourishing of the person next to you. With compassion, like Paul wrote, really love them, delight in honoring them. Guys, think about how this week you can live for the life of the world.